Ladies and gentlemen, this is part B of the 15th treatise. You will recall that in our initial session we interrogated the independence of the Kenyan judiciary, and we did this by looking into what other jurisdictions, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom jurisdictions, have done to safeguard the independence of their judiciaries. Now, coming back to Kenya, it is critical to note that matters independence of the judiciary have been substantively addressed within our constitution. In fact, at Article 160, it specifically safeguards the independence by clearly outlining that the judiciary is expected not to take any directions or authority from any governmental organ or any body whatsoever. That aspect of independence is further dissected within the Constitution in terms of the mode of appointment of judges and the securing of funding for the judiciary. If you look at Article 166, it expressly provides for the fashion through which the Chief Justice and the Deputy Chief Justice are selected, and you will realize that the same falls within the express domain of the Judicial Service Commission. Of course, subsequently the names are to be submitted to the National Assembly, which upon approving, then the president will then have the responsibility of appointing the said persons to the particular offices. And like we discussed in the previous session, it would seem that that then brings in the aspect of democratization of the process of recruitment of the Chief Justice as well as his deputy. Of course, under Article 166, it also talks of the recruitment process of the other judges, who you will realize does not involve parliamentary sanction but is an express province of the Judicial Service Commission. Ultimately, if you go to Article 172, it creates a body, an independent body, that is a Judicial Service Commission, with the express mandate in terms of the recruitment process of the judges, and also ensuring the smooth operation in terms of recruitment and operationalization of the judicial system as it operates in Kenya today. Of course, if you go further to Article 173, it provides for the creation of a judiciary fund, and it is anticipated therein that the registrar, the chief registrar of the judiciary, is expected to submit her budgetary estimates to the parliament, which would then be expected to approve the same, and that fund would then be a charge on the consolidated fund, thereby safeguarding the financial independence of the judiciary, which is core in terms of ensuring and guaranteeing that indeed this special organ of the government retains its independence. Now, in interrogating this aspect, I want us to look into how independence is safeguarded within our jurisdiction of Kenya vis-a-vis what has happened in those other jurisdictions, so that we can maybe assess if there could be some amends that could be done, or some different fashion of doing things that we could adopt even as a country, so as to avoid the quagmire in which we are finding ourselves in now, in view of the tiff that is currently prevalent between the judiciary and the executive. Now, if I start with the aspect of appointment of members of the bench, like we had indicated in the previous presentation, the previous treatise, you will realize that the Kenyan courts have given a position in so far as the interpretation of Article 166 of the Constitution, which states that the President of the Republic of Kenya shall appoint based on the recommendation from the Judicial Service Commission. Now, this is an aspect that has been determined substantively, not just this year, but it's important to realize that even in 2014, the Law Society of Kenya filed a petition to compel the president to, as it were, appoint judges who had been recruited, but the president had taken more than a year to do that which he is constitutionally expected to do. And it is important to note that if you look at those proceedings, the 5-judge bench that was constituted to look into this matter adopted holistic, historic, and purposive interpretation of the Kenyan constitution in determining what exactly is meant or was meant by the framers of the constitution when they said that the president is to appoint upon recommendation. And you will realize that the bench then looked into the history. They looked into where the Kenyan, how the Kenyan judiciary has grown historically, and they took cognizance of the fact that in the interlude towards the change of the Kenyan constitution in 2010, there was the commission on a review of the constitution, which went throughout the country to receive views and, opinions of Kenyans and different bodies. And it turned out that one of the organs of the state that was at its lowest ebb, that was looked at, that had low opinion among the Kenyan populace, was the Kenyan judiciary, which was felt, and most Kenyans were of the opinion that the body was not independent, as it were. In fact, it is also crucial to note that it is because of that mindset of Kenyans, that general lack of confidence by Kenyans in the judiciary, which reached its core after the 2007 contested presidential election, when one of the losing parties, in fact, made it clear that they will not seek solace in court. They will not present their grievances to court because, as they rightly put it, they lacked a confidence in the Kenyan judiciary, which they believed was the handmaiden, was a tool by the executive, and therefore they went for the process of mass action. Now, it is this indictment on the Kenyan judiciary, the court found, that then formed the gist, then formed the reason as to why the framers of our constitution opted to create an independent body, that is the Judicial Service Commission, which was exclusively tasked to the mandate of, carrying out the recruitment of members of the bench within the Kenyan judicial dispensation. Yeah. And therefore, you realize that on that premise, then you will get to understand the reason as to why, notwithstanding the fact that in other established jurisdiction, for example, in the United States, it would seem that the appointment of judges is a purely political process, as we established. And the same also applies in the United Kingdom, where the Lord Chancellor has got an upper hand in that he can decide to accept or refuse to accept recommendations from the Judicial Appointments Commission in the United Kingdom. An explanation as to why in Kenya the framers of the Constitution brought a different, or rather adopted a different approach insofar as the recruitment process of the judges is concerned, can be clearly traced on our history. Now, it is on that basis that the courts in Kenya have spoken repeatedly, and have said that insofar as the Judicial Service Commission have made their opinion, have recommended persons for appointment, then the president's hands are tied, and the much that the president can do is the ceremonial duty as head of state, which is basically to appoint. Secondly, in so far as matters independence of the judiciary are concerned, we also talked of Article 173 in terms of funding of the judiciary, and you will realize that funding is a core aspect in terms of safeguarding the independence of the judiciary. This is important because, like the Chief Justice has repeatedly stated, as it stands now, the courts are being, curtailed in terms of doing their work. They're being curtailed in terms of providing service, providing justice to the Kenyan populace, because that which was crafted in the budget that was anticipated based on their budgetary proposals have been cut substantially by the executive, so that then you find that this core arm of the government cannot do its work as is envisaged under the Constitution. In fact, a keen relook at Article 173 of the Constitution would clearly establish that inasmuch as the framers of the Constitution were proper in trying to safeguard that aspect of independence, a leeway was still left to Parliament, because as we are all aware, inasmuch as the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary may submit the proposals, the estimates from the Judiciary to Parliament, in the end of the day, it would fall upon the domain of the Parliamentary Budget and Appropriations Committee to review such proposals, and they can actually even opt to significantly reduce the same. And that is exactly what has happened in the Kenyan scenario, so that then we find the judiciary finding itself in the position in which it is now, where it cannot carry out its mandate. In fact, you also realize that in view of that loophole, then you find a scenario where, inasmuch as Article 166 of the Constitution envisages that the judiciary shall not be under the authority and direction of any arm of the government, but then again you realize that Parliament can then use that provision under that committee to, as it were, stifle the operations of the judiciary, because in the end of the day, it falls within it to determine what would be the size, the scale of the budget that the judiciary would be appropriated to within a particular financial year. So that then, even as I conclude on these aspects on matters independence of the judiciary, I think it would be good for us to look into what other countries have done and that which we can borrow in Kenya, and as well what are the nature of amendments that can even be proposed within our constitutional dispensation. What are some of those changes that can even be put in place by those who are already vested with the role of being in charge of the judiciary, and in this case I have in mind the current Chief Justice, so that at least the Tiff that we are currently experiencing can be a thing of the past, and the independence of the judiciary can be safeguarded, even as our judiciary stamps authority and gets its place within, its rightful status as one of the major organs of the government. My proposals to that effect would be, one, in so far as the funding of the judiciary is concerned, I would propose an amendment of Article 173 of the Constitution, so that it should not be that the National Assembly is given the express province and authority to, as it were, review estimates that come from the judiciary. It should be such that whatever estimates are presented by the judiciary, then the legislature, Parliament, must be under a duty to approve them, as it were, so that then the financial independence of the judiciary can be, as it were, safeguarded and guaranteed. Secondly, in matters appointment, recruitment of the judiciary, I think that the best example that I would use would be the American jurisdiction. Remember, in our talk, we did find for a fact that part of the reasons that have occasioned the strong standing within the American judiciary is the longevity of the members of the bench, and it's such that they supersede the normal electoral cycles that bring in a new team within the executive after every 4-year electoral cycle. And I would think that we should perhaps need to relook our system, at least in so far as the time frame that is placed where members of the judiciary would ordinarily the retirement age, and not just that, I'm also thinking of the position of the Chief Justice. Would it not be proper that perhaps, okay, we may not take the life tenure route as is adapted in the American jurisdiction, but perhaps would it be proper if we would consider that the term of the Chief Justice would be increased to maybe 15 years or even 20 years or something like that, to avoid this recurrent politicking that surrounds the succession to that office, as is currently happening even in Kenya, given the fact that the term of the current Chief Justice is approaching an end. Would we perhaps not consider a scenario where we increase the term of a Chief Justice to maybe 15 years? Maybe I think that would be some proper food for thought. Secondly, in terms of how the Chief Justice conducts operations, I would perhaps borrow some leaf from the renowned American Chief Justice John Marshall, who served for 34 years and is in fact credited for safeguarding the institution of the judiciary, particularly insofar as matters judicial review is concerned within the American jurisdiction. And it is said that one of the major characteristics that this gentleman had was that of massive persuasion skills, in terms of just doing proper coordination or proper networking. And I think this may also be important in the context of Kenya, given the fact that in the end of the day, we have to appreciate that within our current political dispensation, in as much as we have the doctrines of separation of power, the truth of the matter is that the executive arm of the government under the president still holds so much power, so that it would be important that holders of office of the Chief Justice also ought to exercise a lot of, that persuasion, that leverage, proper networking, so that at times most of what would appear in the public as tiffs are things which would perhaps be sorted out under the table through right networking with proper channels to the highest office in the land, that is the presidency. Because of course there is a sense in which at times when open fights appear to be coming out between the executive and the judiciary, and it would seem that, and then again it comes out clearly that in the end of the day, the judiciary then seems to be a body that simply makes a noise, but then lacks that teeth to bite. I tend to think that on the basis of public perception, some of those sparks do not appear so well in terms of, the public seeing the judiciary as an important arm, as a core arm, and as a major player within the dispensation of separation of power. I think there's a sense in which at times it would be so important that the major players in these arms of government, and that is the presidency, and I also have in mind the Chief Justice, that the Chief Justice has a way in which he can do his thing and find solutions without necessarily having to come out, and without necessarily having to paint a picture of a person who is so much overwhelmed and who does not really have power to make things work. Finally, and in conclusion, I would really want to say to Kenyans, the audience, that we must note, we must bear in mind that the independence of the judiciary is core towards ensuring proper governance in Kenya. The judiciary plays an important role in keeping both the judiciary, in keeping both the executive and the legislature under check. Our court system have done this robustly, and it's only proper that as Kenyans, all Kenyans must come out. All Kenyans must do their part in terms of supporting the judiciary, particularly when it comes to ensuring that the core tenets in our constitution, insofar as ensuring the independence of judiciary, are safeguarded and are properly put in motion, so that we can have a strong judiciary that can do its job, can deliver on what is expected of it by the Constitution of Kenya. Thank you.